My name is Victoria, and this is the story I've been afraid to tell until now. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to discover their true nature, then stay with me, this confession is for you. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more bold and unfiltered truths. Growing up, Uncle Frederick was a figure of awe in my family. A celebrated artist with paintings displayed in galleries across the country, he was everything I admired: creative, charismatic, and deeply respected. My parents often spoke about how lucky I was to have such a talented uncle who took a special interest in me. It felt like a privilege. When Frederick asked me to model for his next big project, I was flattered. "You have such a timeless beauty," he had said, his words dripping with charm. "It's only fitting that I capture it on canvas." My parents encouraged me to accept, gushing over how monumental it was for him to choose me for his work. I agreed, believing it was a chance to strengthen our bond while being part of something extraordinary. The first time I stepped into Frederick's studio, I was struck by its eerie beauty. Large, haunting portraits loomed from every wall, their eyes almost alive with emotion. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and something else I couldn't place. He guided me to a chair near the window, where the light fell perfectly. His fingers brushed my shoulder as he adjusted my pose. "Hold still," he murmured, his hand lingering just a second too long. I dismissed the unease as my imagination. After all, this was Uncle Frederick, the man I trusted completely. The first few sessions went smoothly, or so I told myself. Frederick's intensity while working was something I had always admired, but now, sitting as his subject, I began to feel the weight of it. He was meticulous, obsessing over every detail of my posture and expression. "No, not like that," he would say, his tone sharper than I was used to. "Turn your head slightly. No, more. Now lift your chin. Good." His instructions felt more like commands, and any attempt to relax seemed to irritate him. One afternoon, Frederick handed me a long, flowing dress. It was deep crimson, with a neckline far lower than I was comfortable with. "Wear this for the next session," he said. When I hesitated, he smiled faintly. "It's for artistic inspiration, Victoria. Trust me." I didn't want to disappoint him, or my parents, who were so proud of me for doing this, so I reluctantly agreed. That evening, as I posed in the dress, I felt exposed under Frederick's gaze. His eyes lingered, and when he moved closer to brush away what he called a smudge of paint from my shoulder, his touch lingered. It was brief, but something about it felt wrong. I froze, unsure if I was overreacting, and forced myself to focus on the sound of the brush against the canvas. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my diary, the pages a refuge for thoughts I couldn't share with anyone else. I wrote, "He looks at me too long, too closely. Even when I'm not there, I feel watched. Am I imagining it?" I stared at the words for a long time before closing the book, unsure if I was ready to admit the truth, even to myself. Frederick greeted me with an air of excitement that morning, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Today, I want to try something different," he said, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. "Something bold, something that will elevate the piece." He hesitated, then continued, "It's a partially disrobed pose, nothing explicit, just enough to convey raw vulnerability. Purely for the art, of course." His words felt like a heavy weight pressing against my chest. "I don't know," I began, but he cut me off with a disarming smile. "Trust me, Victoria. The greatest masterpieces are born from daring choices. You're helping me create something extraordinary." His charm, his confidence, it was impossible to argue with him. I nodded reluctantly, convincing myself that this was part of being an artist's muse. As I sat there, feeling exposed under his gaze, every second felt like an eternity. His eyes, once filled with admiration for my supposed timeless beauty, now seemed piercing, invasive. The studio, with its towering paintings and the faint smell of paint thinner, felt suffocating. I tried to focus on anything else, the sounds of the brushes, the ticking of the clock, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being utterly vulnerable. After the session, while Frederick stepped out, I glanced at his sketchbook, curiosity pulling me toward it. What I saw made my blood run cold. Sketches of me, poses I had never taken, each one more intimate than the last. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. When Frederick returned, I confronted him, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. He laughed, dismissing my horror with a wave of his hand. "It's called creative license, Victoria. You wouldn't understand." His words were dismissive, almost mocking. I left the studio, my heart pounding, fighting the tears threatening to fall. I had no intention of snooping. But after what happened with the sketches, something inside me snapped. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being lied to, manipulated by someone I had trusted my whole life. That evening, I found myself wandering through the old, forgotten hallway of Frederick's home, a place I'd never dared to enter before. There, hidden behind a velvet curtain, was a door I hadn't noticed. It creaked open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A private gallery. The walls were lined with portraits of women, but they weren't just any women, they were eerily familiar. Some had the same facial features, the same expressions I'd seen in the mirror countless times. And the poses, they were provocatively posed, some reclining, others with their eyes half-lidded, lost in a silent seduction. My heart raced. The paintings were unsettling. Raw, intimate, and everything I had feared. Before I could turn and leave, I heard footsteps behind me. Frederick stood there, his eyes flashing with something dark and knowing. "You shouldn't be in here, Victoria," he said, his voice eerily calm. He stepped closer, cornering me. "These are my masterpieces. I create them because I have to, because I feel." His breath was warm against my skin. "You understand, don't you? This is artistic passion, Victoria." I backed away, my pulse racing. "No, this is wrong. This is not art." I gasped, my voice shaking with anger and fear. But he only smiled, as though amused by my distress. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran. Outside, the air felt like a breath of life, but the weight of what I had seen was unbearable. I called Emma, my best friend, but when she picked up, I struggled to explain. "I don't know how to say this, Emma, but he's not who I thought he was." At dinner the next night, Frederick's words sent a chill down my spine. "We all have secrets, don't we, Victoria? Some are more private than others." The look he gave me, cold, calculating, made my stomach turn. I couldn't live with the truth anymore, not with the fear gnawing at me every day. The weight of Frederick's actions, his manipulation, and his betrayal felt suffocating. So, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I gathered evidence. Photos of the paintings, some of which I had been too afraid to look at again, all captured in secret. I started recording our conversations when Frederick would talk about art in ways that felt more like excuses for his behavior. It wasn't long before he tried to justify himself. He showed up one evening, remorseful on the surface, his eyes filled with false regret. "Victoria, I was wrong. I never meant for you to feel uncomfortable," he said, his voice low and coaxing. "I'll destroy the paintings. All of them. I'll make it right, I promise." But there was something in his eyes, something that didn't match his words. When I hesitated and said I couldn't trust him anymore, he snapped. "You can't do this," he snarled, his tone shifting instantly. "You'll ruin everything, Victoria. Don't you dare think you're in control here." I stood my ground, refusing to back down. That night, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I exposed him. At a family gathering, with everyone watching, I pulled out the photos and played the recordings. I recounted everything, my voice trembling with anger and fear. The room was silent at first, then erupted into chaos. Some of the family couldn't believe it, others were horrified, and a few even sided with Frederick, claiming it was just a misunderstanding. But the truth was out. As Frederick left, his face twisted in anger, he leaned toward me, his voice a cold whisper. "This isn't over, Victoria." I looked into the camera, feeling a chill run down my spine, but my voice was steady. "If you're in a situation like this, speak up. You're not alone. And please, subscribe for more bold confessions."